riding the airwaves with all the queer you can handle. It's the Queer Centric, and here's Jonny.
Hello, everyone. It is Jonny, your favorite host, of course, for another episode of the Queer Centric. This is going to be a really fun one. I've been wanting to talk to this gentleman for a while, and just to prove it, here is a very well-worn book. Everybody in my camera can see right there. It has dog ears. I really enjoyed it. But I want to say author, producer, actor, artist, human, and cancer survivor Edward Miskie joins us to talk about his book, Cancer, Musical Theater, and Other Chronic Illnesses. Marking his 10-year anniversary cancer-free, he unflinchingly shares the medical and mental and self-evolving journey that few really ever talk about. And I know I am very honored that he has chosen to talk with me today. So we want to welcome to the show, Edward Miskie.
Hello.
Yay, hello. Hi.
I'm so excited. You have been on everybody's podcast in the whole entire world. And I'm so glad that we've made the list because, this is a big deal. Your book, this is the 10th anniversary of you being cancer-free. So this is the second edition of this book. And I want to start by saying, like I showed the viewers the book that I actually read. This is not fake news. I have to say, I am amazed by it. Like, I felt bad saying I enjoyed this book because you're like, but you have a knack in this book of sharing some very real information, very real story of what you went through, and yet it's entertaining when you do it. Like, I enjoyed every aspect of reading it, but I had to keep reminding myself, this is a real story and this is rough. So for listeners who don't know, let's start with, can you give us a brief breakdown of the book?
Sure. Kind of the language that I've been using around it is that it is a fantasy nonfiction musical theater fever dream about being a cancer patient and survivor. And I really just don't know a better way to describe it.
That's very accurate. Very.
Yeah. The thing of it is too, like, even though reading through it, it is very ridiculous and heightened, and all of the things that are happening around you feel so chaotic. I didn't really change anything in any of the stories. Like, the points of the stories and the function of the story is what actually happened.
Right.
The thing that feels heightened about it is that I've placed the scenario within a specific musical, and that's the world in which you live. But everything that happened, and like, I didn't really embellish much at all.
And it's insane. And is it weird to silently wish in my heart that this is actually a musical? Because it should be on Broadway. That's your world anyways. But it is so, I just love the whole aspect. And it is a fever dream, and yet you share a lot of truths in this. And because that's a very vulnerable thing for you to do, why did you choose to do that?
Because I was really upset at how long it took me to normalize. And even now, have I normalized? I don't know. Certainly talking about this regularly as I do now on podcasts and other things has helped that process a little bit. But, coming out of the hospital, a lot of the things that had happened to me, and even during treatment, I wasn't really privy to it. No one said, oh, this is going to happen. Oh, this could be a thing. There was no real support, at least not like boots on the ground. I've been through this kind of support. And it wasn't until years later that I was talking to someone who was fresh out of treatment that I was like, oh my God, I'm not crazy. Like, this actually happened, and this is actually how I felt. And so I decided, I didn't know what I wanted to do with that period of my life. I always felt like I would do something. A book kind of seemed far-fetched for me at the time. But that's kind of exactly what happened. So.
Right. Well, just to read this, for the people who are going to run out and get this book, as you should, nothing is far-fetched for you. You have no problem thinking very large, and just, at least that's the idea that we get from you as it's like you're trailblazing your own way. You talk about a couple of moments where you're kind of surprised when you meet people who get it. I mean, this is a rare form of cancer, but you barrel through it. And one of the things I wanted to talk about is there's what I would consider kind of a heartbreaking story. People took it in different ways. I mean, it's happening to you, and yet people who were your friends seem to be reacting differently. One, of course, in particular, your friend who you see on the street, you let him know, and then you see him later. Can you talk to me about what the reaction was like and what kind of you took away from people's different reactions to your life?
It was I think at first it was very heartbreaking and eye-opening while it was happening, but it also just was kind of one of those things where it's like, well, this is what's happening, and if you're not on board, then goodbye, and I don't have time to explain otherwise or beg you to be around. And I've started to kind of like channel that feeling in other parts of my life in a good way. You know, I think a lot of times with, you know, the kind of work that I do with social media and marketing, and then also the life of this book and the forward inertia that we have with that, you know, it's kind of like, I didn't create this for my friends. And so if they're not on board, like, that's okay. You don't need to be on board, but I'm going to continue moving forward with this. And I think that that is an attitude that a lot of us should take on in other parts of our lives in general, because like, I'm not here for you. Like, I love you and you're my friend, and whatever relationship we have, like, I value it. It's why I choose to spend time with you and why you choose to spend time with me, and we have that reciprocal friendship. But like, I'm like, that, all that said, like, how I function and what I do is not for you or your benefit. That's not what I've created this for.
Plus, it doesn't change the fact that you don't get to be like, oh, you don't like it, well, I'm going to go home, I'll just do something else. This is your life. You know what I mean? It's like this, that's not an option for you. So I almost feel like, I know you're not like born and raised in New York, but it's a very New York kind of way to approach it.
I have been here a very long time. I feel like, aside of actually being born and raised here, I often joke that I was born in Pennsylvania, but I was raised in New York.
I feel like this is true for you.
Because I moved here at 18 and I was alone, and I didn't have any money or friends or plans or jobs, or I didn't go to college. And so it was just kind of like, okay, let's figure it out and make it happen. And you know, it's been 18 solid years as of last week that I've been doing that. So it's kind of, I think, safe to say that I'm a New Yorker.
I think it's very safe to say that. And so let's go right to the beginning of this. I mean, you were immersed, you were in love with theater, you loved acting, and you were good at it, and you were booked for these shows. And that was your life. And then out of nowhere, of course, this kind of takes you, because you weren't even, were you in Reno? I'm trying to remember when it began.
It was right before Reno. It's sort of, I had left Ohio. I was doing Hairspray in Ohio, and I'd left there to go home to see my parents when I found this little baby lump the first time. And the only time I found it, and it stayed there. And and then I had left. I was in New York for a couple weeks rehearsing for the next version of Hairspray that I was doing, that was going to be in Reno. And then once I was out in Reno, it was 18 weeks of watching this thing grow.
Right. And the fear, you're really good at kind of conveying that weird manic panic, basically, because you don't know what this is. All you want to do is keep doing what you're doing. And this thing is getting in the way. I mean, what made you, so you even named him, named it. What made, I mean, I think that probably added levity to the situation, but what made you decide, I'm gonna just embody this as a persona, give it a persona?
It wasn't an intention. It just was a moment that happened, you know, like it was, I was in Reno. I had gone to an emergency room to have it, what's it called? Not ultrasound. Yeah, ultrasound. Yeah. That's the thing where they take the thing and they wipe it all on you with the gel stuff. Right. Yes. And my friend Brian used to come up on Sunday nights after the show, and then we would drive to Sacramento together so I could get out of Reno and like spend some time not in Reno. And you know, there's not a lot to do there. And so like I went to this emergency room. They kind of gave me this list of things that it could be, and we joked that it would have been like a teratoma, and it was going to like grow teeth and eyes and hair and whatnot, like that joke in My Big Fat Greek Wedding. And you know, it just was this moment where he goes, well, you're gonna have to name it. And I just thought that was so ridiculous and funny. And at the same time, like Little Shop was playing on the TV at the bar we were at, and we just
Yeah.
were like, all right, it's gonna be Seymour, and we had a good laugh about it, and that was it.
Right. And then Seymour stuck around, and
He
I
stuck
have to
around.
say,
He put up a good fight.
reading, yeah, but you won, and that's what matters. What is fascinating is this book also just things that people would have to deal with, a $3,000 bill, all these things that are blocking this man who needs this treatment, and yet it's this little thing that I was so angry in that moment because you were able to convey the frustration and I remember. So what is it? Has it changed or over time the way you look at healthcare? Because wow, it was quite interesting.
I mean, I think that was kind of the first real eye-opening experience I had in that capacity, where like there was a barrier to entry, you know, like and especially in New York, because like there's a lot of free options here.
Right.
There's a lot of social programs. There's like there's a bunch of like gay men specific clinics here that you can go to. There's the free clinic for just like basic stuff. And of course I had like a regular like GP doctor that I'd go to like once a year.
Right.
You know, unless I needed to do something else, in which case I'd go to a clinic or whatnot. But it was always
Right.
just kind of like, you know, you did the thing, you got the bill, you paid it later at the end. And that was very
Exactly.
normal. It was very normal. And so this was the first time that it was like, you know, ye shall not pass.
Right. Yeah. We don't
And
care that you have this big thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
and what's really funny to kind of bring this into present day, I co-parent a dog with my neighbor.
Oh, nice.
And you know, because neither of us are responsible enough to take on a full dog
It
full
takes a
time.
village.
It does. She's lovely. And case in point, you know, the other week she wasn't eating, and she was kind of like woozy and like not standing up straight, and she was throwing up water that she was drinking.
Oh, yeah.
And we were like, this is bad. So I took her down to an emergency room and you know, a 24-hour pet clinic.
Right.
And they saw her and they did the thing, and they basically were like, there's a big blockage. They did an x-ray. They're like, we're gonna have to like do an endoscopy. And if that doesn't go how we need it to, we're gonna have to do surgery. And we're like, okay, fine, figure it out. And they would not start unless it was paid for. And then what really pissed me off is that she was already unconscious, like dog was out. They had done the endoscopy. They couldn't make leeway on what they needed to remove. They realized it was way bigger than they anticipated, and so they needed to do surgery. This dog is unconscious on a table, unconscious, like non-responsive, and they wouldn't move her into surgery until we paid for it. And this was like a $9,000 surgery. And so the two of us are just standing there like,
Yeah.
We'll figure. Look, we're not going to run. Go take her into surgery. What the fuck are you doing?
Right.
And it was totally a flashback to this moment you're talking about, where I couldn't go get my treatments done that I needed to have done, the tests and the scans, unless I paid for it. And it's just like, what in the world? And so my attitude, I guess, to your question is that it hasn't changed because nothing else has changed.
Exactly.
If anything, it's gotten worse.
Yeah, which is terrifying. And I have to say, in moments like that, I see them as they're more than just a fork in the road. There's all these options that could happen, all of these storylines that could happen. And so thankful when they can happen. I mean, it was a fight for you, but you were able to go down, and it makes me sad to think about that that's not everybody's story. And I have to say, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was going to say it's, you know, thank God for the family I have and the position that they were in, that they were able to, my mom was able to put a credit card down to pay for it, because like you said, that's not everyone's situation. And if that would not have been the case, what would have happened? You know, I would be dead. Like,
exactly. I was going to say, two strong pillars in your book are your parents. And it's fascinating. First of all, in the book, they're calm, they get things done, you know what I mean? And I think that's amazing. My family, we would all be lit on fire. We can't do it, but they were there. Your mom, all the stories you tell your mom who's in the hospital room, that is insane. How were they, did you find out anything later? Like, was it under the surface? They're calm for you because they need you.
No, I mean, in general, they're both pretty level-headed people,
Yeah.
and as crazy as I can be, I think at the core, I'm pretty level-headed. Nothing really
Yeah.
gets to me in that way. And my dad's a little more hot-headed, but he's not easily set off.
Yeah.
And I've seen my mom's temper, like, when I was a kid, but as
Right.
as adults and whatnot, they're very like, okay, this is the thing, we need to do this is how we do it, and this is what we're going to do, and here we go. And the two of them were just an insurmountable source of strength and normalcy, and just like nothing was wrong. And I think
Right.
about that sometimes too, because they never let on that anything was wrong. They were just there
Right.
because I was there, and of course they were going to be there, and they were going to do anything to make sure that I was okay.
Right.
And that
Right.
ranges from anywhere from just like physically sitting in a room to going through the paperwork and the notes and the bills and the
Yeah.
recommendations and the protocols and the medical stuff. And my mom works with that stuff on a daily basis. So
Yeah.
again, super lucky
Right.
to have her. But it was, I didn't find out until later when I asked them. Specifically, we were talking about this, and there's a moment where my right, like, oblique side felt like it was going to explode out of my body.
Oh,
And I was clinging onto the hospital bed in like
right.
complete spasm, like didn't know what was happening. They gave me morphine, which I was allergic to, and like that
Right.
didn't go. It was a
Ugh.
whole thing. And my mom told me later that she thought that was it. She
Oh,
was like,
wow.
she was holding my hand while this was happening, and she just had like prepared herself for that to be it.
Well,
And
it's a very intense moment that you talk about that.
it was.
And yeah, it's crazy. And then what I find fascinating also is, so you're dealing with, this is a rare form of cancer. This is a very aggressive form of cancer. And yet you seem to have a determination throughout the whole process to continue to live as best you can, and to keep, have people over, have the parties, what is it? Was it ever a conscious moment, or is that just the spirit that you have?
I think it was a combination of both. That comes from the moving to New York at 18 with
Right.
nothing to figure
Right.
it out. Where it just was like, I didn't want that to control me. I didn't want to be
Right.
the sick kid. I didn't want to that's why another reason I didn't tell anybody that it was happening, like
Right.
just my close circle of friends and family. I didn't want to be the sick kid. I didn't want this to get me down. I still wanted to live.
Right.
And so like I just the way I describe it to people is that I was leading cancer along I was dragging cancer along on a leash instead of the other way around, even though at
Exactly.
times it absolutely felt like it was dragging me around.
Yeah.
I very much felt as if though me personally had control over my situation.
Right.
And I think part of that kind of like allowed me the space and the bandwidth and the energy to win over that.
Right.
And I think I figured out in talking to, other people in interviews, that the parties and the other things that were just normalcy to me were necessary and I needed them.
Right.
But I also think that on some level I wanted, and maybe I didn't realize this at the time, but it's certainly how I view it now, that I wanted to have good memories of that period of time
Right.
so that I could look back at them and be like, you know what, that was really fun.
Right.
And also on the other side of that too, had I not made it, that my friends would have had moments to look back at and say, that was really fun, and he's not here, but do you remember when we did whatever?
Right.
And I don't know if I consciously did that then. That's how I view it now, but I just wanted to be normal, and I wanted to see my friends and do the things that I would have done had this not been the case, you
Right.
know.
I feel like we're in our culture, we are basically told, well, if you ever get sick, you are required to act this way. And you did the exact opposite of that. You need to act sad. You need to, I mean, you're not going to feel well, obviously, but you made that exerted effort to be like, fuck that. I'm not going to go put a shawl over my head and stand in a corner with the lights off.
No, well, and I mean, to be fair, I did wear hats, which was never a thing that I really did, and I did avoid being seen in public in places where I was not comfortable. Like my friend Brooke's bar, that was a place that I was comfortable. I knew people there.
Right.
It was cool. It was one of the reasons why we had parties in my hospital room in my apartment, so I wouldn't
Yeah.
have to go out, because I didn't, instead of wearing the shawls and being a sick person, whatever, I hid.
Right.
I
Yeah.
hid because, again, I didn't want to be seen as the sick person, and God forbid someone in like the industry in which I worked saw me,
Right.
and rumor got around. Like there were already rumors flying amongst our not close friends.
Yeah.
Someone that I had worked with, I think I mentioned this in the book, someone that I had worked with in one of the hairsprays had told everyone that I was like dying of AIDS and I was lying about
Yeah.
having cancer and all this other shit.
Yeah.
Which is like, first of all, like, fuck you, man. Like, you don't know me
Right.
like that, and you weren't there, and you don't know what's up.
Exactly.
And also, I have the last laugh now, so
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you've got that last laugh for a few years now, which is how to do it. One of the other things that I love is that I mentioned, or I alluded to it, so unapologetically talking about things that I don't think I have ever seen someone with cancer talk about, which is you talk about the problems with sex and making sure everything's working. And you talk about the conflicting truths, is what I call it, between to masturbate or not to masturbate, which is a whole thing in the book. So
it is, yeah.
Why? Those are things I would have never known. Why choose to say, you know what, this is it. This is how it works.
Because, again, like, I wasn't told. And I think having experienced this and being on the other side of it, there's so many things that you just make assumptions about as a non-cancer experiencing patient person,
Right.
that if and when it would happen to you, it's like, wait a minute, that's not what this TV show or this movie was like. Or
Right.
my aunt whomever that I see twice a year had it, and that's not how it was for her.
Right.
And I really wanted to hit those points home. And I think the big ones for me were dating and relationship, sex, and also recovery. And like how recovery is so much harder than being an actual patient itself. And that those were all things that were surprises to me. Like, because I think the hospital, to a degree, and certainly myself, stopped viewing me as a person and started viewing you as just a patient. So all of those things make you feel things and want things and are human, like relationship, sex, etc. They go away, but they don't. Like, they go away to the people around you, because how could you possibly be thinking about that at this time?
Right.
But like, I was 25 years old, and I was hot at one point during that period of time. Well, before that period of time. And I was getting my jollies in my 20s, and then this happened, and it was like, well, I still want to do it, but like, regardless of how I feel at this moment, like, is this the end for me? Have I had sex for the last time? Have I dated for the last time? Like, what? And it was also like that panic of like, oh my God, I don't want it to be the last time.
Exactly.
And there's not a lot of conversation around that. And so that was so important for me to include.
And it was very eye-opening, and I think important as part of the story. I have to say, was there ever a final verdict? You have this amazing nurse at one point near to the beginning that says, you need to masturbate. It's going to help this. And then we find out when you're, they're doing all of the stuff in the room you're locked in for your, keeping your immune system safe. And then someone says, oh no, it could do a lot of damage. Was there ever a final verdict afterwards that you found out what is the truth?
No, I never asked. I think just, I guess, my educated guess there is it's circumstantial specific, like in the beginning, like, yes, chemo was happening and things were starting to decline, but it was still early on. I still had my hair. It was my first time in the hospital. There wasn't any real danger per se with that. The second time when they were like, no, don't do it, like, that was more in the exiting the dire moment, and into the transplant. And certainly, like, when you don't have blood counts and like you could like bruise from like someone touching you the wrong way. When you think about the function of what an actual orgasm is, with like blood cell or blood dilation and all of that, and swelling of things, you could really damage yourself. And thankfully all I got was a hernia or a hemorrhoid, but
exactly. But it could have been really worse. Yeah,
Yeah, I was going for
exactly.
it. But like it could have been worse. It could have been a brain hemorrhage. It could have been like,
Yeah,
an eye bleed. It could have been internal bruising. Like it could have been a lot of things, but I was
yeah.
lucky. But I've always been kind of a defiant little asshole. So if you tell me I can't do it, I'm gonna be like, oh yeah,
Right?
okay.
Exactly.
We'll see
Which I
about
sort of think
that.
the defiant little asshole part of you is why you are still here with us.
I agree to a point. I feel like I know when being a defiant little asshole is okay
Yeah,
and when
yeah,
it's not, and when you need to like fall in line. And
right.
I very much walked that tightrope during that period of time.
Another thing is, and which I love, so you talk about being young, and I have never been that young and hot. I've always just been me, and I love me, by the way.
I don't
But
believe
what
that.
is you don't believe that?
I don't believe you at all. I think we are all so terribly judgmental and picky at ourselves. Even now, I'm like, I look back at photos of me when I was like 27 and I'm like, you fat fucking piece of shit, get your shit together. But then I'm also comparing myself to a body that I had after cancer, which is like
Right,
not fair.
right.
Like I can't be at my cancer weight when I'm actually a healthy human being.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
why am I drawing that
Right.
comparison?
And this is
So
perfect
I don't
because
believe you, and I'm sorry to have interrupted you, but
no,
I just wanted to
that's good.
drag you for a second.
I'm down. I'm in for it. That brings up a good point, though. There's a very poignant moment in the book that you were having to re-accept your body, and you're with some friends, and there's that vulnerability and that insecurity. Do you remember that moment? Does that stay with you?
I don't think it does consciously. It's not something I think
Yeah.
about on the daily, but that was definitely a turning point. That like gay resort nudist camp thing like
Right.
is still alive and kicking, and they've gotten much bigger since I was going. But that was and they'll maybe never know this, but that was such a formative summer because it was new. Everything was new. I was in the best shape of my life going into it, and coming out of it
Right.
I just felt like this saggy skeletor. It was so weird. It was
Right.
this really strange feeling, like I was all tits and collarbone. It was very weird.
Well, I have to
um
say, just witnessing through reading, you're finding yourself again. You finding some confidence again in these moments, in these people who accept you exactly who you are. That's a beautiful moment. That I think anybody who reads it, it's something we all can relate to on some level of wow.
well, and I will also say too, I mean, I know everyone can be like this, but I'll speak specifically to the gay community because that is in fact, the
Right.
community to which I belong, or don't belong, depending on how you flip it.
Very
But
good.
uh I think we are always going to be harder on ourselves, and making the assumption that people are looking at you in a particular way isn't fair to you.
Right.
And aside of the whole who cares what other people think about me, like that what other people think about me is none of my business kind of
Right.
quote thing.
Right.
um that I think I went into that little resort thing in the Poconos like so nervous that I was going to be looked at in a particular way, and then getting there and realizing that there were all kinds of people there and no one
Right.
was looking and no one gave a shit. And it was
Right.
just my own ego garbage bullshit expectation of myself that was tripping me up, and I still do
Right.
it to this day. Like that's not a wound that has healed.
Right.
That is a daily thing that I like. I put on a shirt and I'm like, this fit better 2 months ago, what's going on?
Yes.
And beat myself up. And that is just me and me. That has nothing to do with anybody else. And I think a lot of times we see all of these gentlemen on the internet who
Yes.
are wearing nothing, and God bless them, I follow them all.
Right.
But
Yeah.
like
Exactly.
but it's just such a false expectation, because either you were born weighing nothing and it was super easy for you to build that up, or
Right.
you have the backing of science behind you. And
Exactly.
no judgment to a degree, but
Right.
don't I like I think we need to just constantly remind ourselves that that's not real.
Exactly.
You hear
Yeah.
all the time these celebrities who get in shape to do movies and how horrible it is and how unhealthy it is and how
Yeah.
terrible it is,
And they'll tell you how miserable they were
how miserable
having
they
to do
are.
that. Yeah.
And so like I know several people that do the science pump, let's call it.
Yeah.
And I mean, are they less miserable than someone who's trying to do it naturally? I don't know. But
Right.
I just think that comparing yourselves to people who do those things, which is neither here nor there, isn't fair for the rest of
Right.
anyone who doesn't want to do that.
Exactly.
I had actually asked my doctor right after treatment if I should do that. To be clear, we're talking about steroids, not meth.
Right. There's a little
Which
bit
is
of
a
difference.
totally sometimes most of the times they go hand in hand, but like right now we're
Right.
not talking
Right.
about. So like I did ask her, I was like, I was like, I kind of want to do a round, like just to
Right.
perk myself back up. And she was like, are you fucking crazy? No. And I was like, why? And she gave me this rundown. I'll never forget it. And I repeat it to people all the time and I sound like a fucking parrot. She's like, think about it. You're making your muscles bigger. What's a muscle? Your heart. Have you ever heard of someone who has an enlarged heart and what the fuck problems they have? She's like, get that out of your head right now and just go start eating well. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
I have never thought of that.
I loved my oncologist because she would lay it down for me like that.
I have never, until that, now I'm going to use that example anytime I talk to people because you don't think about that.
No, well, and I know two people right now, both of who are users of the science pump, and they both have heart attacks, and neither of them have any plans on stopping using those substances.
There becomes that addiction, not as in physical, but in the mental addiction.
And one of them I know way better than the other one. And I met him at the summer resort camp thing, and he's just the most lovely human and so kind and so beautiful, regardless of what he looks like. And he recently had a major cardiac event. He has like 50% usage of his heart. And I ran into them overseas when I was visiting, just randomly ran into them for no reason. Like, it was just like, what are you doing here?
Right.
It was so funny. And I asked him how he was doing, and he kind of told me, and he said, like, they aren't really sure if it was like the partying or the drinking or the steroids or whatever, but I'm happy and I'm just going to keep living my life and not change a thing and whatever. And I was like, you're going to
not change a thing. Wow.
And that just made me so sad. And like, he's an adult, that's his judgment call,
right.
He can do whatever. But it's just like, fuck, man, like, he's not, I don't even think he's 50, and if he is, he's very close to just having turned. And like,
yeah,
like, what? And so like, that is, I always hear my oncologist in my ear, like, are you fucking kidding me?
right, exactly. It's amazing what we're willing to sacrifice for that thing that's put in us in a culture, especially in gay culture,
in gay culture. And it sucks. It really sucks, because I don't want to be judgmental of people, because everyone is at where they're at, right? And like, I judge myself sometimes, but that's a totally different story. But I just, my default is to help someone and to like any way I can. And so when I hear that that's happening, it's just like, oh, I just want to tell you the things, but again, they're adults. They know, they don't need me. I'm not here to be your savior or anything, but it's
and we all know, unless someone is ready to hear it, they're never going to hear it anyways.
They're not going to. And it's again, it's just, I love to look at like the historic context of how we behave as a community, and is self-sabotage a generational trauma of other things that have happened, and what is the need for acceptance and the price you're willing to pay for it despite all of that. And it's like, obviously so off topic, but it's something that I think we all look at and think about, because it's in our face all the time.
Yeah, constant. And I think there has to be a layer, obviously, we know, a layer that's within the gay community that has almost always been there. And it's almost like it would be helpful to us if we could dig backwards and figure out, why is this? I mean, it also doesn't help. I mean, let's add all the layers. It doesn't help, if you're in the industry. I lived in LA for a while. You're in the industry right there. You're in New York. That's a whole other layer to this.
Whole other layer.
Yeah. And it's because it's based on illusion, and yet we buy into the illusion, and then we think we must be this, and yet no one really is that. And if they are, not for long.
Well, and I think it's also the wanting to belong and the wanting to be part of something. And I think, you know, from an outsider in a way looking in, because I don't do like the whole scene thing here and I don't really go out or, you know, much of that, but it just kind of feels like unless you're like, you know, a big muscled up roided, you know, walking
Right.
god or a drag queen, no one gives a shit about you.
Yeah,
And like,
exactly.
and both of those things are fine and have their place and cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm not here to say don't do it, but what I'm saying is like I'm very bored of seeing what people are calling representation in media in the
Yeah.
gay community when really it's such a monolith. And there's
Yes.
so much more vibrance to the gay community than just
Exactly.
being a gym bunny or a drag queen.
Exactly. There's so much more nuance to it that's why when we launched everything, we talked about being for the rest of us. Because there's a whole group, you know, that's like,
There's
wait,
more of us
we're
than there
here
are of
too.
them.
Exactly. And so, but you know, it's what Hollywood is willing. It's what they think they can pass to middle America. And
Yeah.
and you know, it's an interesting thing. One of the things coming from a man who was passionate about acting, you're passionate about Broadway and all of that. You talk in the book about how, I mean, it was a rough journey, and you kind of lost caring about the very thing. And Newsies
Of all
was a
things.
moment. I know, I thought that too. But it was that moment where you were like, "Oh fuck, that's the fire." Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, I've lost it again, but we're finding the way.
You'll get there.
It's been an interesting roller coaster, as the industry tends to be. But
Right.
you know, it just was, it's part of that perspective change when you come out of something traumatic like that and having to face your mortality and have had a couple of moments where like you almost didn't make it. And then going to auditions and singing and dancing on stage just feels like, fuck off, man. Like what are you
Right.
doing? Like, Jesus. And then having that moment in the audience where I realized, you know, like I needed this so badly. Oh wait, this is not a singular situation. There are other people in this audience that needed this.
Right.
And so theretofore, when I am on stage in the other role of not being an audience member, someone else in the audience is needing what I'm giving,
Exactly.
and I don't even know it. It's, in a way, it's very thankless. Like, yes, you get your applause or whatever, but like
Right.
all applause sounds the same, you know,
Yeah.
until someone reaches out to you and says, hey. and
Exactly.
and that's really what it's all about. But to kind of tie those two things in together, you know, the trajectory for this book right now is that I am going to be turning it into a musical pilot for TV.
Oh, I'm loving this.
And we're like in the throes of getting all of that together. And I swear to God, there will not be a single stereotype in this thing. I refuse.
I love that is in your realm. First of all, I was gonna talk about, you do so much. Like,
Yes.
you have expanded into as much of the entertainment world as you possibly can. How do you find time? I want to mention, I found, you know, your album, and of course you do so many of your own podcasts as well. And now I didn't know about this, but you're working on putting this show together. Where do you find the energy, one, and the time, and does it fill you like you wanted it to before?
This is such an interesting line of questioning here. So I think for me, it's like, I don't think I've ever been inhibited by my creativity. Like, and if I have, it was short-lived, because it was like, oh, I can't do that because people will get confused because they don't think that I do that. It's always
Right.
just kind of been like, I want to do this, so let's do it, and I'll figure it out. And I learned, you know, Logic and GarageBand and like all of the things, and I found a mixer, and I send him off, like he's a brilliant engineer, and I send him all my things, and songwriting and music is in my background with my dad and my mom, and you know, I grew
Yeah.
up with it. And so it's not, I don't want to say it's easy, but it's not a task.
Right.
And you know, being a millennial, we've all been trained and brainwashed into monetizing our hobbies, and so that was kind of like the thing that I will spend money on and don't expect to get any money back from,
Right.
because I love it and it makes me happy. And I actually have a new track coming out soon that I'm so excited about.
Nice.
And if I can, I will briefly tell the story about it.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, um, my dad used to record bands in our basement. He had this little rinky dink, like reel to reel studio with a little mixer that was used that he got secondhand. And, I think he would charge like $30 an hour for people to come and record their demos in his basement, whatever. And so we had this band come in, I think it was 1992, 1 or 2, something like that, called Echolalia. And they were this 3 or 4 person band. And the front person, the singer, was a woman who, in my 6-year-old eyes, looked like a Barbie doll. I don't even think I was 6. I might have been 5. I don't know. I think this was like preschool. And there were 2 songs on this demo that just has stuck with the whole family ever since. And like every couple of years we'll bring it up, and every couple of years we'll have a laugh, and then we'll go digging for the demo and we won't be able to find it. And so whatever. And so something about this year just made me want to hunt down these people. And I was talking to my dad about it, and he was like, oh, this person's name. He like went into the archives and he found the person's name, and I found them on social media, and I sent them a message. I never heard from him. And then after like a month, all of a sudden, this woman contacts my dad out of nowhere to ask him for something that he would be able to help her with her new band. And he was like, oh, yeah, sure, cool. Also, my kid messaged you about this song. And she was like, what? And he's like, wait, so you messaged me not knowing that, like, whatever.
Crazy.
And so we got in touch and we talked about it, and I got permission to cover this song. And it was very like 90s, like, grungy Party of Five vibes.
Nice.
And I've completely turned it on its head. It's like this epic, like, anime theme now.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's so fun. It's called Bubble Magic. It's coming out this month. I'm so excited about it.
I was gonna say, yeah, when is it?
Yeah, I don't have a date I need to check on the date. I don't know, but I'm very, very excited and very proud of it. And it's just it's a 30-year passion project in the making.
Which I see, and it should always have, I don't care how long it's been going, we should always have those moments. But speaking of that, and that you do all of these things, will you tell our listeners where they can find like podcasts, your one-stop shop, your music, and everything?
Oh my God, all the things. Yes, I absolutely will. But I before I do, I want to tie this back to what your last question was, because I didn't answer it. You're think
so good.
I'm like, thank you. I want to answer your questions. The energy part of it is hard, like I don't want to sit here and be like, oh my God, I love doing it, so it's so easy. It's not. There are days where I want to like curl up on the floor and hide, and I don't want to talk to anyone. But I think especially this year, and particularly with the book, it's been easier to do because it's a straight shot. And in my mind, it's just like, this is where we're going. And it's so easy to do it when that's the case. And so then I question, if I would do that with everything else I do, would it also be easy? And so it's not so much a question of time, it's a question of priority. And so for me, the book and everything around it and what I want to do with it is a priority for me. And so I set time aside to do things like this, to do the pitch deck for it, to do meetings and calls and talks with people that I want to work with, who are going to come on board and who, could potentially lead to other investors and whatever. And so it's what I want to do, and nothing is going to take that priority. And so it's just figuring out, if it's not a priority, maybe you need to find a way to make it one, or maybe this isn't the thing. But there's also another weird layer to this too, where this being the second iteration of this book, the first one having been self-published, I spent no money on it, and I just kind of like put it up online and was like, I wrote a book, and I got some traction with it, and it was fine, but I didn't do anything about it after that, partially because it was brought to my attention that there were typos and there were fuck-ups in the manuscript. And of course there were, because I spent $0 on a copy editor. I had friends do it, and all of the corrections that they made on paper, I was transferring to a document digitally. It didn't save correctly, or I sent the wrong thing, and by the time they had all printed, it was too late. And so I just kind of hid it for years. And this year being my 10 year, it was just this snap decision to be like, you know what, I'm gonna fucking do this the right way. And here we are. And I did. I got a publisher, I hired a publicist, And I've been doing this like digital book tour podcast venture for the last,
which I love. You're
several
very
months.
entertaining when you watch all of them. Also, I want to speak really quick too. I think I call it vision, but priority is more accurate. But when you have priority and the big vision of what you want, it almost has an energy of its own that helps move us along.
It really
when,
does.
On those days when you don't have the energy, if you have those two things, it pushes you.
And also too, I question whether or not I've had that before. I don't think I have, at least not in this way. There's something else that's pulling this along for me. And I don't know, I can't explain it. It's just not like, it's nothing like I felt about other projects I've done in the past.
Yeah.
And it just is so clear to me that like this is what we're doing, and nothing is getting in the way of it.
And nothing seems to be getting in the way. Yeah.
I hope so. Because I am unemployed right now, and that is also another reason why I have the time.
right, exactly. Well, what would
frantically
you tell...
looking for a job right now.
Oh, it's and what a great market to do it in. I mean,
I know.
I know, right? What would you say to like our listeners who are now going to read this book? What do you want them to know? What would you, from your mouth to their ears, what would you want them to know that you've learned?
Learned about what? Like learned about
just about the human spirit and how you have come to this space in your life. Like because cancer is a lot. It's I think at this point I lost my dad to it. We all have some connection to it. But you have found your spirit has found its way to this point because it can get cancer or not, life can bury us at times. What would you want people to know?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the whole cancer affecting everyone thing, I really just feel compelled to say, like, I just lost a friend this week from cancer, and I didn't even know he had it. He did exactly what I did, and he only told certain people, and I totally respect and understand why.
Right.
But Brad Bradley, he was a big Broadway guy and was such a treasure of a human, the nicest person you've ever met, and he passed this week, which is still unbelievable to me. And so yes, it does affect everyone at some point, and some more than others, because he's been around for decades and has had a huge pool of impact. And just what a star. Original cast, I think, of Steel Pier 1987, like
wow,
just incredible. Anyway, an incredible human. But all of that to say that I think what I would want to convey to everyone is that you're never stuck, and you always have the choice. And like none of us get out of here alive, and you don't get a do-over. So like if you hate where you're at, you can change it. And that's going to be harder for some people than for others, because then there's of course the conversation of privilege. But I have backed myself into financial roughness many a time, and every single time, the choice that you make to get out of it leads to the next one, and you can have very similarly to how I was talking about the book and the clear vision of the momentum forward. You can do that for anything. It just depends on your circumstances, and it depends on what you want. And if you hate your job, leave it. If you don't like the friends you have and they're not making you happy, leave them. Like, and again, the archy of privilege of course comes into this conversation,
right?
But you are able to choose.
Exactly. And in the end, I always tell people, because I get it as well, but the only limits we have are those that we accept on ourselves. Exactly. And yeah, some people have a harder push, but we all have the ability. Nothing's impossible. It just, the level of work sometimes can be.
Well, and it's also, I like that you said what we accept, because it is kind of like, it is kind of like that sit down with yourself and have a moment and be like, what am I accepting in my life that I don't want?
Right.
And then weeding that out. And it's scary. I had a really long conversation with a friend of mine in the beginning of the pandemic. I was so lucky. 2 of my best friends lived within 2 blocks of me. One of my other best friends lived just across the park from me, and I knew people in my neighborhood that weren't like friends, but we'd check in with each other.
Right.
And so I had this really great cushion of people around me. And I had mentioned this to one of my friends at one point, and he was like, I don't have that, and I don't know anyone who does. And you're so lucky to have that. And I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Because I just always assumed that everyone had like their
Right.
little pod and like that was your people. And I
Right.
think especially in the gay community, that's less true now.
Yes.
And that comes down to a much longer conversation about community and the need for it versus the
Right.
want for it.
Exactly.
And that's a conversation for another time. But
For a sequel podcast.
right. And of course, like making choices that that are scary are harder to make. If leaving the friends you have because they're not treating you how you want to be treated, or et cetera, and you have no one else, like of course that's going to be a difficult decision to make.
Right.
But again, none of us get out of here alive. And so intentionally living the life that you want for yourself is where it's at, because it's only been within the last year or two that I've really realized that I do not have the life I want.
Right.
And I'm not accepting that anymore.
And that's, I think, personally, that's exactly where it's at. Now, before we let you go, please tell people where they can learn everything there is to know about Edward.
Yes, circling back to that. I can go off on tangents. I'm so sorry.
Me too.
I can talk
I'm
forever. So you can find me on all the socials at Edward Miskie. That's YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. Instagram and TikTok are my two ones that I pay the most attention to. You can also stalk me a little bit on edwardmiskie.com. I also have a link tree that's just /Edward Miskie. There's lots of things there. Find Bubble Magic on Spotify and listen to it. I hope that it'll be out by the time this lands. Also my podcast with my friend Sarah is called I Want to Be a Rich Bitch. It just landed this week. We're having so much fun with it. We're starting our guests soon. We have some celebrity guests coming up, which we're really excited about. And it's just, find me.
And it's worth it. You also I was watching some of the How to Be a Big Deal, and I'm like, well, this is right up my alley.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, How to Be a Big Deal was a red herring. I did that as a test run for I Want to Be a Rich Bitch. It was it was kind of like the content form of it and all of that. I was just building it. I was building it to build it and see the pieces that I needed and how I wanted it to look aesthetically. But all of that's going to be offline, and we're moving it over to Rich.
You have a great way of titling these things, because those titles are exactly what people are like, oh, I need to listen to this. So,
well, and how to Be a Big Deal will probably live in some other capacity, because because I do stand by that title. It's good. And
well, and you're embodied. It might not be this podcast that continues into the future, but you embody that exact phrase. And so that's what people are going to take away, especially listening to the new podcast.
Yes. Well, and also, like, How to Be a Big Deal, again, I want it to continue on in some capacity, which I will get to eventually, but Rich Bitch is the focus. However, like, being a big deal doesn't mean Beyonce, but it's kind of, it's carrying yourself and treating yourself as if though you were.
Exactly.
Like Taylor Swift, that shit, like, just think about, like, two of the things. I'm gonna go off on this forever. I'm so sorry. Feel free to edit this out if you need to. But like Taylor Swift's long game, I will talk about this forever and a day. The planning, the foresight, the specificity of every single thing that she does when she releases something.
Right.
The hints, all of that. That is how you're a big deal. And you don't need to be Taylor Swift to do that. You can sit down with a spreadsheet and figure it out yourself. And it's just the elevation of who you are to who you want to be.
Exactly. And there are no limits. It's all, we all have life in our hands. And I think that's amazing. I do want to remind our listeners that you do want to read this book, trust me, because I've enjoyed it very much. Cancer, Musical Theater, and Other Chronic Illnesses by Edward Miskie. It's a really good read. Don't let cancer things scare you off. It's amazing, and the story is important. And a lot of the lessons that everybody takes it in, and I know when I overthink everything, and so I always get some good things. There's something for everybody. So please, you can get it. I got it on Amazon, so you can get it anywhere. So so
Barnes and
make
Noble,
sure you do it.
Amazon, Apple Books, all the things. And if you're in New
Exactly.
York or coming to New York, you can get it at the Drama Bookshop on West 39th Street.
Exactly, which I feel is a victory. I just love
huge
that.
Huge victory.
Yeah. Well, thank you, sir, for taking time to be with us. I know it's like a whole 3-hour difference over in New York. But I know
New York's on fire. I'm not going outside. It's all good.
Oh, this is true. This is true. You can't breathe out there anyway.
Right.
So
I'm holding up in my apartment.
But thank you. And then I have a feeling I will be talking to you again in the future. You've got a lot going on. So
I hope so.
You will. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Jonathan. You too.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. We will see you next week. Remember, this show drops on Tuesdays at thequeercentric.com. And as always, we love you.